All right. I want to welcome everyone that's joining us as y'all trickle in. I am Stephen Procopi. I'm the president of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana, a independent nonprofit uh, uh, watchdog, nonpartisan organization. We work on state policy issues. We have a monthly webinar series that y'all are joining, and today we're going to be talking with two of the new leaders of two influential business organizations. We're going to not say too much in terms of introduction here because the goal of this is really to find out more about them, more about their organizations and what their plans are, what they would like to see done for our economy. So I'm going to start. Will Green is the president and CEO of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, or LABI. They're also sort of called LABI. Will, do you have a preference between LABI and LABI?
Whatever's easiest.
Great. And before that, you were the head of the Louisiana Dealers Association for nearly 7 years. Adam, a fixture in the Baton Rouge area, is the new CEO of the Committee of 100, a statewide economic development organization. Before that, he was head of the Baton Rouge area chamber for 15 years. Thank y'all both for doing this. This is really, y'all are both new in the roles at the same time. So I wanted to see, might be a big shakeup, or it could be y'all are continuing the same tradition. So the first question I really have for y'all, really just broadly, talk about what your organization is, what it does, and what you see in your role leading it. Why don't we start with Adam?
Sure. Hey, thanks, Steve, and appreciate it being on here today. So the Committee 100 has been around since the early 90s. It was started in an era when there was a lot of distrust and concern across state business community with the management of the state finances, and a lot of CEOs were pulled together to hire at that time KPMG to do a big investigation of how to reorganize the state government. That is the kind of the DNA of the organization, is to bring CEOs together to try to tackle big, complicated state level problems and to continue to use those executives as a force for good. It's a nonpartisan organization, but does advocate on specific issues. In most recent memory, the organization has been affiliated with PAR, y'all's team, and the folks at Cable on the creation of Reset Louisiana, which is a statewide platform for the future of Louisiana, and it was really used as a tool this past election cycle to talk about 9 big categories of public policy interests for the state. And our 3 organizations were really the lead on doing that. When I joined the organization about 3 months ago, almost to the day, what we really pushed this organization to do is be much more engaged in actively working on those policy recommendations from Reset becoming law. And as the first big goal, the second big goal is to make sure that we are looking at the way that the state performs economic development, being a partner to the agency, LED, and other state agencies involved in that work, but also looking at how other states do economic development differently than Louisiana maybe does, and being a partner to help Louisiana be more competitive in that work. And so we see ourselves, that's why it's in our name, the Committee of 100 for Economic Development, is to frame our view of public policy through the lens of economic growth. And we can talk more about why that matters. But those are the 2 big goals. Organizationally, we're made up of individuals who are kind of invited to join this working group of executives. They come of all political stripes, but they are all owners, top executives, or individuals who want to join and be active in this work. And we intend to put them to work to do that public engagement around policy work. So a little bit about us.
All right, thanks. Now, before I get to you, Will, to get a couple more seconds. So we're going to ask the first couple of questions, and Melinda's going to ask a few questions, and then we're going to have y'all's questions. So if you have a question y'all want to ask either of them or both, either about their area or about economic development in general, start putting those in the chat. I will let you know, for those of you that haven't done these webinars before, we try to get to everyone, but we almost always run out of time. So the sooner you get your question in the chat, the more likely we'll be able to ask it. And Melinda will be asking us questions. Sorry. So Will, tell us about LABI and your role and just what is that organization?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And again, thanks to Stephen and Melinda and PAR for having us on today. And I appreciate, really do everything that you all do to help educate and guide the citizens of Louisiana. You really are a good sounding board. And to voters and to individuals and to citizens to help educate on some of the policy initiatives that come down the pipeline. So I'm Will Green. I'm the CEO, president of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. We are the state manufacturing association. We are the state chamber of commerce. We've got roughly 2,000 members. We are the largest trade association, business trade association in the state. And so we've got members of all shapes and sizes. We kind of like to say we've got everything from the little mom and pop dry cleaner all the way up to the Fortune 500 company. And so as you can imagine, we represent small businesses, large businesses, businesses of all shapes and sizes, industries that care about all kinds of things, from everything from energy to taxes to tort reform. I mean, we've got law firms on our board. We've got energy producers on our board. We've got construction on our board, infrastructure. And so how we kind of guide and herd all of the industry and business kind of cats is we have different councils, and we have a program of work that's been built since the 70s when Lobby was founded. And so I actually had the good fortune almost 10 years ago, 2014 and 2015, I was actually on staff here at LABI, and I led what's called our Civil Justice Reform Council, and I led our Employee Relations Council. And that's two examples of industry-specific issue councils that we have. We also have an education council. We have an energy council. We have a technology and a trade, transportation, and tourism council. We have a small business council. And so within each of these issue area councils, we have sort of a program of work that guides us on issue areas, both state and federal. And then based on those, we look at different issues, different legislation, and that helps guide and direct us on what legislation that we either support or oppose, with kind of the umbrella of the free market system to try to drive and grow business, promote the workforce. And so when C100 goes out and recruits these businesses and grows the businesses and attracts businesses here, we try to support them and keep them here and increase that workforce and make sure they've got the best policy and best infrastructure possible here in Louisiana.
Great. Okay. We already started to get questions. I love it. We're going to start talking about policy probably now until the end. So let me start with the upcoming special session and regular session. So what are your priorities for that session? Are there particular things you want to see, and priorities for the next 4 years, since we have a new governor, a lot of new statewide elected officials, and a lot of legislators? So Will, why don't you start? What are your priorities for the session, and then, for the next, for the term?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I do think is really interesting right now, and as we go around, we talk to members. Just got back from Washington Mardi Gras, which is, it's one of the most interesting events that I've ever been to. It's exciting on a lot of levels. A lot of people kind of say it's the preseason to the political legislative process. But there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement right now, because you've got a new governor coming in, you got a new insurance commissioner coming in, new legislative leadership, a lot of new legislators. And so a lot of credit goes to my predecessor and the staff here at Lobby. They saw that opportunity coming, and we knew we couldn't just do kind of the same old, get down in a bunker with Lobby staff, figure out, okay, what do we need to do? We went with, talk to national organizations, local organizations, regional groups, PAR, different local chambers. We got together with different think tank groups, and we put together what was LA 23, which brought really broad-based policy solutions that we knew if we implemented them over a period of time, we could make Louisiana an economic giant in the South. And so we really, it kind of boiled down to four big things, right? It boiled down to workforce, education, improving our tax climate, and crime. And then so you've got those four broad things, right? and then you narrow them down to, so what's the wolf closest to the door? And I think, it's not rocket science, right? It's basically, and look, I think a poll came out recently that said, what is the number one issue on everybody's mind? And again, I mean, it kind of aligned right with what the 4 big policy buckets are right now. It's insurance, it's education, and it's crime. And so those are the 3 things that we've absolutely prioritized and that we will be looking to as a priority and policy areas that we can improve on immediately this session.
That's great. It's Adam. What are your priorities? What are Committee 100 priorities, not just for the session, but also broadly?
Yeah, so 3 big topics we're looking at, mostly looking at the regular session, and we'll be supportive of efforts in the crime session. But see us taking a lead in looking at the role and structure of LED, Louisiana Economic Development. There's a lot of talk about how we think about the future of that specific agency, how it coordinates across all other agencies, how it sets a long-range strategy for the state's economy, and then how it performs competitively to some of the states that have the best performing economic development agencies. And so we want to spend some of our effort this coming legislative session to look at that, and are talking to our new state secretary, Susan Bourgeois, and the governor's office about their thoughts about where that agency is heading. Second big topic is around workforce and talent. I think we are interested in seeing, with a new supermajority of conservatives in the legislature and Governor Landry, efforts to try to shore up the challenges that businesses and executives have around workforce and talent supply in Louisiana. Some broad ideas around that span, I would say, from high school all the way through adult education and talent recruitment. The third big category, what Will just said, I think there's a consistent interest in addressing issues and challenges related to property and casualty insurance and auto insurance prices in Louisiana. And we expect, as he said, there to be a package of bills. And I think this is something that across the entire state landscape, we should all be responding to the crisis and the threat that's happening in insurance as something of an existential threat for existing and owning assets in Louisiana right now. And so to do that, we see a lot of leadership coming out of a coordinated effort between Commissioner of Insurance Tim Temple and his efforts to build a broad strategy and include a lot of folks in that thinking, and come forward with a package. We expect to be kind of working in lockstep with his team to do that.
Oh, that's great. And just as a side issue, PAR will be working on insurance, though not necessarily working in lockstep with the Insurance Commissioner, but to hopefully get information from him and at least coordinate or cooperate. Now, so that's sort of the broad issues. And in fact, we've already started to address some of the things that are in the chat. But so I'm going to turn it over to Melinda, and we'll have 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll start turning and see what the chat has to say. So Melinda, why don't you lead us through?
Okay, and thank y'all for those who have already started putting in questions in the chat. They actually dovetail nicely with the things Adam and Will have already brought up and things on our list. So this is working out well so far. So let's start off with something that has been a high profile issue for several years in Louisiana, ITEP. The governor has yet to make any new changes to the rules for the industrial tax exemption program. And that's the program I suspect most people on this webinar will know, but that's the one that gives property tax exemptions to manufacturing facilities. Former Governor John Bel Edwards put some restraints on the programs, capping the property tax exemption at 80% rather than 100% for up to 10 years, and requiring some local government entities to sign off on those exemptions. Obviously, Governor Landry has talked about making some changes. I'd like to know from the 2 of you what kind of changes you would like to see to the ITEP program, and if you've got any intel on what Governor Landry intends to do in his changes. And let's start with Will on this one.
Sure. Look, I think we've got to, any business will tell you when it comes to taxes and investment and building infrastructure and their decision to either relocate or expand in a state, they need certainty. They need predictability. And right now, unfortunately, the ITEP is anything but. I think under the previous administration, adding all kinds of different political hoops for companies to have to jump through, these are large companies that have to, they can't turn on a dime based on the political whims of certain, local areas. And so I think right now there's barriers to the ITEP process. And so, we would encourage the administration, and I think best practices in this would be, to limit the different hoops you have to jump through, bring more certainty, bring more predictability, especially if it's going to be left at the 80-20 or 75-25 or, whatever level it's left at. There needs to be some sort of streamlined, predictable process to the ITEP.
Adam, do you want to weigh in on that one?
I do. Yeah. I think to me, it's really interesting that the changes that were made as have really kind of provided that it's an 80% exemption instead of 100% exemption. That was really the most radical part of the change to reduce the value of the incentive back in 2016. And it was a rocky start to how that was executed, as Will described, and it remains today rocky largely because of procedural steps. What is fascinating, and we were looking at the Economic Development Transition Committee and Fiscal Transition Committee from Governor Landry that was released last week. And that page, it describes that transition committee's interest and commitment and support for retaining that level of 80% abatement, which is a pretty significant structural change to state incentives for trying to attract and grow manufacturing in the state, which is the core purpose why it exists. That what Will just described is something that's critical to this. Having spent the last 15 years at the Baton Rouge Area Chamber working with companies on manufacturing, and we were on the front lines of having those conversations with local officials as they were going through the approval process. It is complicated and confusing for a lot of the locals on that process. It's not necessarily well executed between the relationship with LED and a lot of those parish authorizations. The ones that seem to be doing it the best have pulled into a streamlined local approval step where you have one local approver coordinating all the participants at the local level in one step. And in that way, I think you can accomplish some of what Will is describing as reducing the number of political hurdles you have to jump through, where there's this one local statewide approval, one local approval to try to drive forward to whether you are approved or not approved for that incentive. I think the other big thing that we've seen in practice is almost all manufacturers now see the clarity of the process is you apply and get approval before you even begin your project while you're still in your investment decision phase, where it had been before 2016. It was, you could file paperwork, but as you were kind of getting started, you could come back through the state level. Most companies now are seeing that as something they are trying to get an authorization on before they begin their projects or make a final decision on their projects. And we expect that in practice to continue to stand across the state. So those are some of the interesting things I think that are consistent from what was done last administration and will probably continue, but also some changes it looks like the administration is recommending. They will have to write an executive order to determine their expectation of how they want it to run. And so we're watching to see when that's done.
Okay, and I was going to ask just to clarify, they don't need legislative approval for any of this. The governor can issue an executive order setting all of these parameters and rules himself.
Yeah, that was all done all by executive order previously in the two different executive orders, one, the original, and then amended one in the Edwards administration that will have to be done again.
And we have a question from somebody who's watching asking, has there been an in-depth study done to evaluate the benefits of the ITEP program compared to the lost property tax revenue to localities? And since y'all are both supporters of the ITEP program, I don't know which one of you wants to take that. Do you know of any kind of studies that have been done on this program?
I know that LED has looked at it pretty closely. I would have to defer to somebody at LED on the research staff, probably has spent more time in that analysis and would probably be better to answer that question.
Yeah.
Well, has Lobby looked at this at all in terms of?
Yeah, I know LCA has also done some work on that about the real, you've got to look at just more than the fiscal notes on the legislation. I mean, I know that's one of the frustrating things is all we have on a lot of this is fiscal notes, which don't really show the impact of when you get a company like that coming in, of the jobs, of the sales tax revenue, of the property tax revenue, of the, they buy, vehicles and houses and groceries and clothing and, all the additional things. And that's sometimes the frustration with legislation, and that, you have to kind of see behind just the fiscal note that, internally. And so the economic impact of what those industries bring to the communities when they come in, I do believe that's been done before. I can't put my finger on that particular study.
I think it's worth Melinda also just clarifying the term local losses that was in the question is a perception of the program. That is the difference between seeing it as a giveaway versus seeing it as an incentive. And I think it's interesting at the local level when these debates have been happening is there is a clear divide between how people perceive the program. Those who see it as an action that would not have happened but for the state inducing that thing to occur, where it's a 20% gain to the local government that would have otherwise not been available versus an assumption that it was going to happen anyway and it's a loss. And I think that's an important clarification.
Well, right. That's what I was going to say. I mean, I think there are very different perspectives about the benefits of ITEP, including whether or not some of these projects would come even if they didn't get that property tax exemption. But that's a larger debate than we can figure out in this webinar. So I'm going to move on. Adam, you brought up the talk in this administration and the interest in some sort of new approach to the Department of Economic Development and some sort of reorganization. We have somebody asking, what does C100 hope that LED will look like under this new administration? And after Adam, Will, I'd like to see if Lobby has an interest in this area too, and what suggestions you would have for the administration on this.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying Louisiana is the only state, just using data over the last 8 years, national kind of job growth data. Louisiana is the only state of the U.S. southern states that lost jobs, non-farm jobs over the last 8 years of data. We looked at actually over about 12 years, and that same trend continues. And of the rest of the southern states, the average growth rate is about 9% over the last 8 years in terms of new non-farm jobs. In Louisiana, had we had that occur, we would have had about 200,000 more jobs in Louisiana. Today, we're down about 10,000 or so jobs from where we were back in 2016. And so it is that core concern that I think we're all focused on, which is what drives that growth, whether you're in Shreveport, Monroe, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, wherever. The performance of the state agency has a lot to do with that. The quality of the programs that they have has a lot to do with that, as well as broad tax policy. But in terms of LED, we have seen multiple states changing their governance models over the last decade, and even well before that. Louisiana is a state where the governor appoints and hires the Secretary of Economic Development, and it's a kind of a direct run cabinet level agency. There are examples of that, across the South where there are high performing states with that model, but they have a different mix of programs. For example, they might spend more resources on workforce. They might spend more resources on marketing their state or looking for international investment. But in most of those high-performing states, whether they're set up as a cabinet-level agency, or as we've seen in states like North Carolina or Ohio or Virginia, they actually have kind of a quasi-governmental partnership of a board of directors that brings together the executive branch, so in some cases the legislative branch, and leaders from across the state to help set kind of a strategic framework for the direction of state economic development goals. And then they kind of direct the agency and oversee the agency in their execution of that strategy. In the states that have those models, and one of the things we're working on right now is to better understand the differences of their models, their programs, and their outcomes overall. And so we're in the middle of a project, kind of working with the administration and LED quickly to better understand those choices that you have in state economic development agencies, with the idea that we want to kind of present 2 or 3 choices to the state that they might pick from, either to continue the course they're on or pick a hybrid of multiple choices from different states. What we want to make sure is we're positioning the state for long-term success. The second big thing we want to make sure we can help the state accomplish, hopefully, is that we don't see the economic development strategy of the state change every time we change the person in the governor's office. And over the last 4 governors, we've had a seesawing approach of under one governor, you do it one way, under the next governor, you do a different way. And we don't have a consistency of approach to how we're going after that. And when you're trying to especially diversify the state into sectors that we don't have as much of, but they are growing rapidly in the rest of the South or in the rest of the country, it's hard to stay consistently on course for going after those sectors, having a presence in Louisiana without a consistent execution of strategy. And so one way to think about success, kind of to the question that was asked, is will we look out 10 years from now and see that we have been able to bridge over into the next administration, that the structure that's set up at LED has a long-range plan and is going to stay the course on that plan.
And obviously that would take some legislation to do such a wide-scale reorganization. Will, is that something that Lobby is a fan of? Are there particular problems that you see with LED that you would like some sort of reorganization to solve or address?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not rocket science. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, like Adam said, other states are doing this better than we are. I mean, you can ask big companies. I mean, I worked, as Steven said, I mean, for the last 8 years, I was the CEO of the Louisiana Auto Dealers Association. I had the opportunity to talk to manufacturers, and, you know, they talked about Louisiana, and they said, look, we have several things that we look at when we think about coming to a state. And we get to about the top 3 or 4 and we start checking Louisiana off the box. And there's a pretty interesting study done. You can find it. It's called the Walmart study. It was a pretty seminal study done about why companies come or what they look for. And look, Louisiana, we have a lot of the resources. We have good rail. We have the Mississippi River. We have some of the best ports in the country. But we don't do, we operate too much in silos. And Adam kind of hinted at this. You know, we need a good public-private partnership. We need to break down some of the silos between our state and our education system. I mean, you look up in Tennessee where they are, you know, companies are begging to come there. I mean, they're getting manufacturing plants, auto plants are coming there. I talked to one of the manufacturers and they said, you know, Will, we went there and we immediately partnered, or one of the first people we talked to was the Louisiana Community Technical College. They created a pipeline for us, a training program for us, to where we knew when we went there, we had job ready people that would come to the plant and you know, ready to work day one. And so I don't think in Louisiana we're having those kinds of conversations. One agency's having one conversation here and they're not talking to the other agency. And so in our LA 23 plan, you know, we talked about this concept of hiring a workforce czar that basically, you know, controlled that and then sort of, you know, handled that all the way down. And so there wasn't one person doing that, wasn't, you know, the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand, and it was more of an organizational structure, and it was run like a business. And so, you know, I think if we could do LED a lot more like that, then I think we can start attracting more businesses, training more workers, and again, utilizing the God-given resources that we have in Louisiana and highlighting those better. And again, start becoming the economic titan in the South that we should be and that we could be.
Okay, so I am going to start asking each of you individual questions because we have a bunch of questions in the chat. So but if either of you want to jump in on it, if I haven't asked it directly to you, feel free. Adam, you're going to get this one, which is somebody's asking about plans or suggestions for developing rural Louisiana and improving rural Louisiana. Is there a strategy that you've heard of or that C100 has to try and help develop rural areas or get them, you know, more engaged in the workforce?
In rural Louisiana, also just North Louisiana in general. We have a lot of activity here on the I-10, I-12 corridor and the industrial corridor, but it's a lot of people in our state, and I see a lot of them in our chat, and I want to make sure, you know, that they aren't left out of the conversation.
Yeah, it's a little early to kind of predict any changes in strategy. I think from the project that I described a minute ago, we definitely intend to have our project to look at 5 high-performing states and their structure of their economic development agencies I would predict that nearly all of them have a rural development strategy, and I think we want to learn from how they staff up and programmatically serve that function. Personally, I've always been interested in the ways that states and localities really foster small business and entrepreneurial expansion in rural communities that can really drive growth as much as anything. And one of the kind of the best programs we've seen around the country, that's one of the things that's really heavily emphasized as a grow your own and support your own strategy, something we've seen done well in central Louisiana, for example, and needs to continue. But one of the things we expect to come out of the research project we're starting right now is to look at all of the programs, and one of them would be kind of how those rural development programs are executed in other states.
Okay. Will, this one I think is kind of directed towards Law B. So you're going to get this one, which is this one's asking about the petrochemical corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, which by some people has been nicknamed Cancer Alley. And the questioner is asking if your organization will continue to oppose legislative efforts to require air monitors on oil refinery and chemical plant fence lines. I believe that's something Law B has opposed before, but I'm not sure. So what's your position on requiring air monitors on these facilities?
Yeah, so I know our chemical plants in Louisiana are some of the most heavily regulated plants in the country. I know that they pride themselves on safety, on being regulated, on OSHA. I know this administration is heavily focused on that. And so again, I mean, we at Lobby, we support reasonable efforts towards that safety. I know that's a big highlight of all of our members, and they're proud of that. I do want to on the rural training question. Look, I do want to comment on that if I can. I'm from North Louisiana. I grew up in Ruston. I'm actually originally from Bernice, Louisiana. I don't usually say that because not many people know where that is. But when I was
right now,
do I?
Everyone's Googling it right now.
That's right. It's a suburb of Ruston. But look, when I grew up, I mean, we still had a main street, and it breaks my heart when I drive up from Baton Rouge back up to Ruston, and some of those beautiful brick buildings, those main streets are kind of crumbling, and we've got to do a better job of needs-based training. A lot of those areas, the schools in Baton Rouge, the training that's needed here isn't necessarily the same training that's needed in Faraday, Louisiana. And so one of the things we talked about on some of the transition teams with some of the LCTCS community college systems and the higher ed systems and the K-12 is, needs-based training. It's getting the high school students into some of the jobs in that area, part-time curriculum, focusing tops on some of the needs-based jobs. And so I think if we can focus on that and do a better job of that in those particular areas, again, the needs in North Louisiana aren't necessarily the needs in New Orleans or in Baton Rouge or Lake Charles. And so we can't have a, one size fits all approach in jobs training and education. And I think, one of the ideas was we have 60 LWC, Louisiana Workforce offices right now all over the state. And, why can't some of those offices be put on the LCTCS campuses? And those offices be more geared towards what those LCTCS programs in that area need. Another idea is Arkansas led the way on Be Pro, Be Proud. Be Pro, Be Proud is a needs-based job training, massive RV that goes around. They're sold out. They go to almost 300 high schools a year, and they go around and they teach high school students through virtual reality, through hands-on training about needs-based jobs that start out sometimes at $60,000, $80,000 a year. And they get high school kids excited to say, you don't have to go necessarily to a 4-year school. You can go to a 2-year school. You can go straight into these jobs in your area. And so I think if we do a better job of that, if we get on board with these programs that other states are doing and are doing well, we can fill some of those jobs, especially in those rural areas.
Okay. Adam, I'm going to give you this one. Somebody watching asking about the efforts being made to secure Louisiana as the lead state in the build out of the LNG marketplace? Are there specific things Louisiana is doing to try and bolster its position in that regard?
Yeah, so we've all been concerned over the last week. It came out that the federal government is looking at ways to restrict LNG exports, concerns related to their effects on the climate. Unfortunately, that's also destabilizing, or has the risk of destabilizing access to low-cost natural gas in Europe, especially at a time when Russia has been restricting access to natural gas throughout Europe during the war with Ukraine. So I think our concern as a state should be to make sure that we're not kind of harmed by that federal policy agenda. Right now, I think the state is really well positioned to grow. LED has been already aggressively for quite a while now going after attracting LNG. Most of what Louisiana is doing has been very supportive of going after LNG projects and has been close to just about all the major opportunities in Southeast and in Southwest Louisiana. The big barrier, I think, for future investment is going to continue to be what the federal government does, less what Louisiana does. And so I think the most important thing Louisiana should be doing, and the governor and LED have an important role in this, and I think the legislature has an important role in this, is sending a clear message to the federal government that we want to continue to see and support access to America's natural gas being available across the world. As long as it's something that is of value to the world, we should continue to provide it.
Will, this one for you. Someone asking about the discussion of workforce expansion, workforce shortages. Is lowering the age of eligible workers and the requirements that teens, it looks like this question is sort of asking, like, is there any move afoot or discussion about trying to fill some of the available jobs by loosening some of the rules and laws around work requirements involving teenagers? I think we've seen that in some other states that have sort of tweaked those laws. Is that something Lobby is looking at as a policy change that they would recommend to the state legislature?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, getting high school students, curriculum, I guess, credits and things like that, on the job training. I think I think those are things we're absolutely looking at and absolutely in support of. I know there's some farm areas where there's some exceptions, as long as there's some, safety requirements in place. There's for kids to go work on farms and things like that in needs-based job areas. Now I'm not real sure the question there on ages and things like that on what specific industries and things like that. But again, the goal of getting a increasing a trained workforce, whether it's high school, college age, veteran, former offenders, those are all the things that we're looking at, whether through regulation, legislation, or just quite frankly through programs like I talked about, Be Pro, Be Proud. We're a all hands on deck approach to that.
Okay. Adam, I think these two questions are both targeted to you and your comments about the LED reorganization model. Somebody is asking, and I'll ask you both questions at the same time, what are the 5 states you're using as a model? And then somebody else was asking, will the results of the research project be available publicly or published anywhere so that people can read the findings?
Yeah, it's 2 good questions. On the first, we're still determining which 5 states we think are the most interesting. So happy to take advice from anyone listening if they want to reach out an email or reach out to y'all and let us know their suggestions of ones they think are doing really good work. We have been reading a lot about and looking a lot at states like Ohio. Ohio is probably one of the most interesting ones from their funding level. They have a very specific dedicated resource that goes into funding statewide economic development. And for quite a while, they've been one of the leaders in putting programs together that look not only at how they market their state for new sectors to come into Ohio, but also and some of their work around entrepreneurship and innovation across the state of Ohio. In the South, I think we look at some of the performance we see out of Georgia and South Carolina and Alabama. They've been able to consistently perform a strategy, execute a strategy through multiple administrations. Virginia, North Carolina are set up pretty similar. We're looking at how they're structured. The former deputy secretary in Virginia's, in Louisiana is now the secretary in Virginia, a guy named Jason Alkubi. And so we have good connections across some of those states. Michigan actually is also run by someone who was briefly in Louisiana, Quentin Messer. And so we've been really talking to a lot of our former friends that have been in Louisiana and now gone on to leadership roles in other states and asking them their advice on that very specific question of which states do you admire the most and think that are the most important to go and benchmark. And so we're going to be going through that process in the next few days to try to nail down which states are the most valuable for us to dig into.
Is there a timeline for when you hope to get all this research done? I mean, is this like something y'all want to have done before the regular session starts in March, or is it a longer timeline?
Yeah, no, we've been looking for this to be something that is a sprint project with a goal of having that research done in the next 5 to 6 weeks. And so this is something that we've got kind of a lot of different pathways that are being worked to make sure we kind of select firms to do that research for us and that they're ready to execute rather quickly to get us that information. But that's a great question. The intent is to try to have it together as early as possible as the legislative session starts on March 11th. So we gotta cruise toward that. To the product itself, the research itself, I do hope that we'll be able to put out something to the public to kind of see this analysis. I expect through the course of the legislative process, we'll talk a lot about that research. And we're really trying to do that in coordination with the governor's office rather quickly. So something to be answered, I think, in the coming weeks is how we'll kind of deliver that information externally. But definitely expect to have it be part of our conversation with the legislature and the public as a state, not just as Committee 100.
Let me say real quick, this is normally planned to end at 12:45, but there's just a ton of interesting questions. So we'll go a little bit late, but I understand everyone drops off at 12:45. I get it completely. And I also hear we may have to come back with another webinar, maybe with the new secretaries of LED and workforce as these plans develop. So yeah, a ton of interest from this. But let's see how many more questions we can get through in the next 7-ish minutes. Melinda?
Sure. Well, this one for you, very valid point that PAR has been interested in, and Reset obviously as well. It's hard to grow jobs over time when the state continues to lose population. And obviously, even as the country's population has been growing in recent years, and the South in particular, we have seen Louisiana's population declining in the last few rounds of estimates. So how do you address the workforce issues when we're losing people?
Yeah, so look, I mean, here's this, and this is what I've been saying. Here's the bad news. Okay, the bad news is that we have the highest combined sales tax rate in the country with Tennessee. We have the highest homeowners and homeowners and auto insurance rates in the country. It's almost double the cost per capita or compared to the mean. We have 3 of the top 10 violent crime cities in the country. We're sitting in one right now doing this webinar. We average about 48th, depending on what ranking, in education. We're one of 12 states with an inventory tax. We're one of 15 states with a corporate franchise tax, and we are consistently on the judicial hellhole ranking. So that's the bad news. The good news is that we can fix every one of those things legislatively, and Governor Landry, through his campaign speak and through his transition committees, has almost committed to addressing one way or another every one of those things. And so is Commissioner Temple, and so is a lot of the legislative leadership. If you combine that with the fact, again, those are things you can change. The things you can't change about Louisiana that are God-given is we got some of the best ports in the country. We got the Mississippi River. We got some of the best talent in the oil and gas industry, both beneath the ground and just humans. And we've got, again, just some of the best people. And so those are things you can't take away. Those are God-given. if we can just get our insurance and do some reforms, and we will, through things like, reforming the collateral source rule and phantom damages, through some homeowners insurance property clarifications and cleanups. And then we go in and we do, some ESAs and some voucher cleanups like Arkansas has done. We promote and better our charter schools. We're top 20 in charter schools and accountability. We do some corporate private sponsorships with charter schools. Our education is going to get better. We got to do better with our choice. And then we get our criminal justice system in place, which hopefully we'll see the governor's plan soon. We're going to combine all that. And again, we're going to attract and grow more jobs. I couldn't be more excited about the LED secretary, could be more excited about the LWC secretary, Susie Schoen. They all are workforce focused, training focused. And so I know we're going to be able to put all those, we love gumbo. We're going to be able to put all those ingredients together, and that gumbo is going to taste great.
We like gumbo. We don't necessarily like gumbo puns all the time. So Adam, I'm going to peg off that a little bit using a couple questions we have here. Will talked about insurance, and obviously insurance is a big issue, but a couple people are talking about the reason people are leaving the state has to do with the existential threat to the land and property of Louisiana. We have a couple people asking about climate change issues, particularly is the best approach to slowing and stopping the use of fossil fuels, including natural gas, as part of an approach to address climate change. Where is C100 on that? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think the question has to think comprehensively about where we are as a state for our economy. And we have a significant amount of jobs and investment across the energy landscape, not only in kind of the exploration and drilling and production of oil and gas in Louisiana, but also the manufacturing of refined fuels and chemicals, specialty chemicals across South Louisiana, across the entire state, frankly. And so the kind of ever-present discussion about what to do about the industrial emissions, carbon emissions of those facilities is something that has been part of this landscape. Over the last two and a half years, we've seen every major industrial company, especially the public companies, announce their intent to be net zero for carbon emissions by the year 2050, which is a seismic change in that conversation for our industrial companies have been, so much so that they are really at the forefront of leading on this all of the above approach for energy investment in Louisiana, not only to continue to make sure that the jobs exist in Louisiana for our citizens and for our economy, but also that we remain competitive as the changing landscape of the energy industry is coming to market. What we're seeing in Louisiana over the last 2 years is massive commitments to invest in that decarbonization effort, but it's also to make sure that those companies continue to provide the products to the world that the world is purchasing, and making sure that they're doing so in as clean and low carbon a way as possible. So we've seen probably around 50 or close to $55 billion of investments in this kind of future of energy or transitional energy space, all working down this path. You'll see terms like blue hydrogen manufacturing. Blue hydrogen is essentially the production of hydrogen, but where you sequester the carbon that's coming off of those facilities. And you hear about green hydrogen, where you're actually producing hydrogen, but you're doing so using clean energy sources, whether that's coming from solar or wind, or potentially other sources. So as you see this can transition between hydrogen, ammonia, lots of new biofuels projects coming to Louisiana across the state. All of those are part of this kind of sea change that's happening in Louisiana and across the energy industry. And Louisiana needs to remain at the forefront of that. Just this week, LSU was awarded a massive statewide research grant. Fascinating to see, as part of what's happening is that LSU is really positioning Louisiana, and it's not just for LSU, it includes ULL and a number of other university partners that are going to be part of doing the research it takes to figure out the new energy sources that will be necessary for the world to continue to compete, and be able to have this kind of thoughtful, stable transition from where we are to this next phase. Last week at our DC Mardi Gras symposium that we hosted, the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute came and really made this really fascinating point, I thought, which is we need to make sure that we have, going to put our target on the most important crisis, and that crisis is around emissions. And how do you make sure that you're lowering emissions and making sure that any emissions are cleaner? Especially as it relates to CO2 emissions. And so it's interesting to see the language coming out of kind of one of the national leaders in the petroleum industry talking about reducing and cleaning the carbon emissions coming out of the petroleum industry. And so that, I think, is the landscape that Louisiana is a part of. And it's, I think, important to make sure that we position Louisiana to attract the investment it needs to be attracting, at the same time as supporting those companies that are creating and have the potential to create many more jobs in the energy industry in the coming years.
I think this will probably be our last question that we're able to take from the audience, but I'm going to direct this one to Will because it's a subject matter he touched on in the discussion about migration. The question is about accountability and school choice programs. The writer of the question notes that business organizations, including Lobby, were supportive of maintaining the current graduation criteria and the LEAP requirements for public school students. Obviously, there's a conversation about ESAs, which are sort of expanded voucher programs, coming up in the legislature, and there is some expectation that something will pass. In light of that, and I know Lobby has been supportive, I believe, of the ESA proposals, do you think that there should be, some transparency and accountability requirements in those ESA voucher programs to ensure that the tax dollars are spent appropriately and that there's some alignment with the state's accountability system?
Look, each parent has a unique need, right? I mean, so I think the voucher program has to meet that unique need. I mean, certainly when tax dollars are involved, there's going to be some oversight with that. But I think it's so important that we take kind of a universal approach to this. I mean, whether the voucher or the ESA account is set up for tuition, for books, for tutoring. I mean, look, there's so many studies that show how beneficial tutoring is. But when you combine that with the fact that so many families just can't afford it. And so, I mean, I think we do need to look at this from a comprehensive standpoint. But the reality is that, look, those are our tax dollars at work. And so if our tax dollars right now aren't being used to their benefit, or aren't benefiting the parents and the students for one way or the other, then they need to be used to their greatest advantage. And if that is for, tuition somewhere, tutoring somewhere, books somewhere, community college, I think we really need to take a hard look at that. And again, that is the future, because that student is the future of our workforce. And, right now the studies show that we're just not doing a good enough job for that student.
All right. This has been great. I think the questions were almost like a hydra. We'd ask one and two more would pop up. I'm going to end with one very short question before we wrap up completely for each of y'all. Just, a lot of life is about priorities, and we got a lot of issues. We got taxes, insurance, crime, the environment, coastal protection, healthcare we didn't even talk about, workforce. So what do you hope? What's the number one priority if you could only get one thing done out of all the issues and priorities you want to see addressed for each of you? What would be the number one thing you could get done? Will?
Stephen, if I could get you to my annual meeting on February 20th, the cocktail party, and then the annual meeting on the 21st, that would be amazing. But no, look, I appreciate you having us. This has been great. This discussion's been great. But look, your members, everybody on this webinar, there is no one size fits all approach. Each one of you have your own need: tax, insurance, crime, education. Get involved, get involved in PAR, get involved in, help C100, help me, help Lobby. Because your voice is really, they hear from me, but the legislators, they've got to go home and they've got to hear from you, either at church, at the bank meeting, at the Rotary Club meeting. And so they need to hear from you on really what matters, because, you're who also holds them accountable. And so I think, as we go in, and obviously insurance is going to be a major priority. Everywhere I go, insurance is the main thing. Lowering property, like Commissioner Temple says, we can't control the weather, but we can control what happens after the storm hits. Can't control vehicle accidents, but we can control what happens after the accident happens. And so we've got to reduce the frivolous lawsuits, and we've got to reduce what happens throughout the claims process. But we need your voice. And so I know I'm speaking to the choir because you're on this webinar and you're listening and you're engaged. But please be a loud voice, and for change. And together we can make Louisiana better.
Right. Strong message. Adam, number one priority.
Yeah, the goal around LED becoming a high-performing state agency, and deeply coordinating with the legislature and local leaders across the state on where we're heading as a state to grow our economy. We have to shoot toward, I would say, 10% job growth in the decade if we want to be competitive. And I think the structure of how we execute that needs to be everyone's concern. And I think I'd just say, kudos and ditto to a lot of what Will said as well in his answer. I will say, if folks have questions that they didn't get to that they want to ask C100 or me, my email address is adam@c100la.org. Reach out. I'm happy to talk to folks.
That's great. Thank y'all both so much. A lot of topics, a lot of interest in this. And to the people we didn't get to, I apologize. We're going to try and come back at some point, maybe later in the year after session.
Sure.
Let everyone know this will be on our YouTube channel. So we will post this out. You can share it with everyone else. I think this was a great discussion. Thank both of y'all. Thank everyone taking their time. We went way over time, but we didn't really lose that many people. So I feel pretty good about that. Thank y'all again, and everyone have a great weekend, and see y'all when next have our next webinar. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.